therapy. When originally, when we took these things, we took them as trips. As it was part of the environment that we were in. So we didn't have a conceptualization. We kind of, you took it enough times to know, like having coffee, as simple as that, that entered into your nature, what element you were looking for at different times and what element you weren't looking for. And even then, in the utilization of these drugs when they first came out, there was a reaction to synthetic measurements put in them and so on like that. Somehow, even those people who were using drugs wanted them to be as natural as possible. So I'll say a phenomena was taking place where once you had these experiences, you re-entered the story from a slightly different place. You no longer trusted the literal life because you had a perception of the life that wasn't governed by a literalness. It wasn't governed by nationality, background, gender. You had an experience of being human before you assumed all these identities of being human. And so when you had the experience of being human, you re-entered the story from a very different place than that's a fierce looking picture for Spiro, isn't it?
It's great.
Yeah, let's see. It looks like he's, oh no, now it's so good. Oh no, this one.
Very different. Majestic. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Michael Bravo just posted that Johnny Depp one.
Johnny Depp won. Okay. Okay, won what? He won the whole case or something like that? Yeah. But so that was kind of representative of a phenomena that's happening, isn't it? In the country where the woman was pushing for respect and an attitude and so on, like so deeply that it's kind of shaped the course of things. That was similar to what was happening when the racial injustice was happening. And then it exploded again. And then those who, who identified whatever was happening, in other words, whoever saw themselves violated at the time. So then you identify with that violation. But then the Johnny Depp was, no, it wasn't me. I wasn't there. It's the wrong guy. I don't think it was me. I think they're okay. So then that was an initial response. But now the response to the attitude of accusation and accusation 30 years ago and 20 years ago and premises is a response back that also is responding to the picture in some way. And so you see a play out politically, structurally, socially. And you also see past relationships and present relationships. So you see everything's in flux. And so what it does do is it forces you somehow to look at your life from different places and different perspectives. And as you do that, the past that you've lived is no longer a past. You see that it is a collection that you carry. And as it ceases to be a possessive, you will have experiences like dreams or momentary reading of something and making a similarity that will kind of reveal the story. But when it reveals the story, it takes it away from the ownership of the literal ownership of the story. And you then see the creative dimension. So you get a glimpse of the creative dimension, which more resembles a movie. And when it resembles a movie, you see the life that you've lived and the life around you have been creative acts, not literal. And so then you see again from the author's perspective, from the director's perspective, not the cover of the story, not the elusiveness, you see it from a deeper dimension. And the seeing adds a dimension to what was lived that was kind of hidden, suppressed, organized in plain sight. But once the light is introduced, it releases the story from its history. And you see history was only one part of the story. And therefore it tried to make everything logical around history. But then you saw, from the perspective of the movie of it, you saw the dimensions of a human life. And when you saw the dimensions of the human life, it's the perception released it from the literal story, the ownership of the story, and therefore released it from a history. Then you met parents, people, friends, associates, so-called history from a different place, where the story wasn't the dominant factor. Now that happens often when friends are dying or parents are dying, and you may meet them for a moment in a different situation where any stranger could have met them in a minute. It may take you 10 years to have that same conversation, because then you discover your parents are people or human beings. Okay, and that's, you discover what is known. But discovery changes the plane. It changes it from a history to a mystery. And you see, living and dying has always been a mystery. That's why they've tried to organize it, figure it out, tell you what it is. It looks this shape, it's that. But the mystery is so elusive that it laughs at the shapes that people have for their own safety or their own organizing premise. They want to know what this life is. And knowing is the least feature. But in the literal life, knowing supposedly is the main feature. So knowing becomes a possessive, and the energy cannot be possessed. There's a surrender of the possessive in relationship to the energy. And that is an example of that when one feels a sense of falling in love. Just the initial feeling releases the literalness of the story. Now, the literalness may try to organize the story into, but the feeling of love is a shared feeling where relationships merge. Now, that may be in the dumbest sense. It may be in people hanging out together and even drinking or going to a ball game and cheering, and they speak their own code. But there are moments when they connect as one person in some weird way, where the surrounding area doesn't know what they're doing or what they're talking about. But the lovers or the friends have a personal experience that's shared. And somehow they know each other, what they're experiencing. If something like that is betrayed or lost, there's a hurt that comes. And the hurt is not some kind of psychological phenomenon. The hurt is, in fact, an accurate representation of something is when the feeling is lost. So the hurt can't be literally located. Sometimes it manifests in physical ailments or whatever, but somehow you see that there is a conversation going on in one's being, in one's life, that is somewhat independent of the literal world that the person is living in. And that as you become aware of this conversation, you start to see the dimensions of that conversation. And to some degree, the self becomes a driver, as I say, a taxi driver of the story. That there's a reliability in its expression, but it is not the owner of the story. There's no owner of the story. That's only in a literal life. That they attempt to literalize this or that. Flying above it, where gravity is not the dominant force, then logic is also not the dominant force. Then you see that you have a palette of expressions available, where logic and reason is one of them. And you know when you're in the zone of logic and reason. But you also understand when logic and reason then becomes organized like a corporate construct of logic and reason, where you see that they've created a logical existence and a reasonable existence around the around the networks of billionaires and military and this and that. They've made it seem logical. But having one experience in any of them, seeing the secret corporate conversation, being there in the zone where you see that you're being sacrificed in the military towards a larger picture and this and that, you run into something which releases you from the literalness of the story. And you see it from the perspective of a human being looking into the story. And that human being assumes identity, is not governed by past identity. And so therefore it resembles a creative act like acting, or where you assume the identity, but you also understand the deeper you come as an actor, the deeper you put your whole heart into assuming the identity. What is missing in the karmic identity is there in the creative expression. From the creative expression, you understand that in order to realize the experience, one must be as close to wholehearted as possible. And so somehow, when you see a person in the theater or in the film, they look natural doing it. And yet you see thousands of hours went into that naturalness. Because there is a conversation that is going on. So when one goes into the creative life, there's a conversation that is going on with the owner of the story, which is the survivor. When you enter and you assume an identity in the creative story, it is not around survival, it is around exploration. And you see when it's around exploration, how many dimensions are coexisting in the life. The discovery of them changes the plane. Does it make it better, softer? I don't know that all applies. It somehow changes the plane. Where changing the plane means one re-enters the story. Where it doesn't mean that because you see something, it's instantly therapeutic. You understand that the therapeutic is not that necessary for when one is sane. You see, then every time something is purely seen, I feel that there is an inherent re-entering of the story where it interrupts time. So whatever body shape you're in, there's still you running through it. Whatever segment of it you're in, there's a thread of you running through it. So you see the impression of that experience of life is a literal birth and death day, and this happened, and you come from this, and you come from that. But as you experience the life, you see that the literalness is only one part of the life. You see, when you have feelings for someone, the literal description of that feeling is only an aspect of the actual feeling. The life that comes through where feeling is a aspect of the experience that lends awakens a dimension where as if it's natural. When there is a feeling of love, there's also a feeling of trust that seems to happen. Trust meaning that there's a merger between. As it separates or whatever, it starts to have separate stories of survival. But there are moments when it's integrated in the feeling. And so the survival of one is the survival of the others. Even in absence and presence, it's almost second nature. But when the feeling is interrupted or lost, then the other dimensions start to come in life, where the togetherness and flux are happening simultaneously. And generally people are, once the creative person chooses the survival method, it's like many stories that I've read where where the guy, we'll say 10 geniuses were in Auschwitz or something, and they were discussing the state of affairs with each other. They kind of dealt with death in their philosophy or whatever. But they were close to the experience where the philosophy and the literalness of the experience were in the same room with you. And so then you see, once you're told that this is going to happen, the body is also told this is going to happen. So there's a literalness that pervades in one's own personal conversation. Something like that happens in one's dying process. When there are simple moments of extreme aloneness, where it really is that you're looking at the other side of the mirror, looking into the literal story. And you're seeing time and space as a variable. And you also see much of it, it was not so much to do with push-ups or jumping in place. It had to do with somehow relationships. So the mindset of what the life was and how to organize it, where it tried to possess it again. So then it turned health into athleticism and activity of that nature, when in fact health was on really many other dimensions where it wasn't the doer that owned the story any longer. Your life was an expression. Your life itself was an exercise in the dynamic. You found a way where to be second nature to where you were coming from, because you understood then it was a journey. When you are not coming from the perspective, you're coming from the self. The self has opinions. The opinions are self-protected. As they literalize, they're self-protected, where the identity attempts to rule the story. But you also, that's why I say, from 10 miles floating above the earth, you see that no one rules the story. You see the illusion as it's played out as it comes to gravity. And so gravity time gives you the logic that that sort of thinking is what's happening. But as a matter of fact, when you have an experience that allows you to re-enter the story, the life itself is a creative process, no longer bound by the dates, no longer are literalized in terms of dying and living. They're more memories. Memories of someone passing away, memories of a parent passing away, or whatever, or a date. It allows you to open up that avenue at a certain time. And you see the dialogues that a person is having. Once the conversation is released, you see that the human being is having a dialogue with the energy, with the mystery. And you see the attempts then of organized thought to organize that experience into literalness. So as if then God is watching and you have a literal contract with them to be this and be that. And all those principles are kind of based on the logic of an institution. That somehow God wants you to obey this institution's rules. And you say, you know, how much as I tried, the failure of that seemed to be a success in another way. Because then you were left to a kind of soul searching that supposedly the religion took you away from soul searching, the need to soul search because they gave you an answer. But in soul searching, you saw that answers were not literal answers like that, but awakenings. And when you had a kind of awakening, it seemed almost that you had a personal relationship with Jesus, where you empathized and you understood what was happening because it was happening for you in some way. So then you kind of got a Jesus before they owned the story and did this and did that to it. You kind of got it, where you're a stranger in a strange land, or the human being who wakes up to their humanity, navigates through a strange world, where identity attempts to rule it, and where identity misses the point entirely. Just like the political identity misses the point, the identity thinks it owns the story, and you have to call out to the political identity, yo, bro, we elected you, man. You don't own the story. And we elected you because you were bullshitting us and telling you're going to do this and do that. So let's straighten it out a little bit. Okay. There's not government. There's people who have an agreement to do this thing and try this thing. And again, every now and then an event occurs that forces soul searching in. That soul searching, even though it's trying, is around authenticity in some way, of locating a space. So you see the broken heart is being forced on the picture through its inhumanity, purporting to be humanity. That one character wants a better deal, that means he has to deny 27 others a human deal. And I say, without even knowing it, is the normalcy. So let's say as the individual perceives something, they're no longer organized into the story. Because they start to see that they come more from a mystery than literal history. And that their parents, their friends, the characters from history were people. At the same time all these events happened, they were just people. They went home and cried over the events, they fought, they had the same experiences. The history and the mystery, when you discover that they were just people, you then, not as a loss, but as an understanding, then you meet yourself in the history. And you meet yourself then as a human being who has challenges coming their way. And those who are the supposedly big ones in history were those who met a huge human challenge from a perspective. But again, as you find out that they were just people, it doesn't diminish the story. You see that somehow there are moments there are people who rose to an occasion. But if you met them, if you were alongside them, if you walked with Jesus on those 14 steps, you would meet a person, a being, a friend, everything you would meet in the situation that sometimes you have with circumstance that you have deep friendship with. Where the doer is not there, you can't do anything about it. Because you understand that the effect will not happen to the larger crowd until they are deeply and profoundly ashamed of themselves. And it's different than being shamed. To perceive ashamed of oneself is to see a dimension of one's story that is withheld in terms of its alarm. And then you also start to see the deeper that you go with that perception that the self doesn't own the story. That there are experiences that one had in one's life that were in fact almost a manuscript of a life. And I feel that one gets to perceive or be with the life they've lived from a different perspective than the ownership, where it has always been a shared experience. And when there was a certain feeling that allowed it to be more than a shared experience, but to enter into another stage with each other where it was second nature to you, as if it was normal. And then in other words, you see the normalcy of having a feeling or shared feeling and something created out of that feeling and the normalcy of it. But then you see the absence of that feeling and attempting to create something like that. When somehow, if there's a hey baby in the story, there may be an instantaneous possibility creatively. But the person alone is left to what to do, where the doing is prominent. But in the affectionate relationship, the doing is an adventure, not the ownership of the story. It's a shared experience, not a threat. When it literalizes, oh, how you doing, Spiro? I don't know either. Hmm? Does anyone know? Okay. Derek, do you know how you're feeling? Well, okay. Hmm? Okay is okay, isn't it?
Yeah.
What's the Indian word for okay again, Spiro? Namaste, and then what do you say back? You can't click your tongue like that?
Sure, sure.
So far, everyone survived it all. And Michael Bravo, was he pleased with the Johnny? Well, I still don't know what the Johnny Depp decision is.
He won. It says Amber Heard found guilty on every count. Johnny Depp awarded 15 million. That's what he wrote. Then he wrote, fight the dragon, get the gold.
Has he been applying that theory? Fight the dragon, get the goal. Okay, but fighting is that you then assume a persona yourself. So let's say I go to the story, literally. And anybody could say this was a movie, this relationship. Wasn't it obviously a movie? It has all the elements of a movie in it.
The trial was a movie.
And the trial was a movie. It seemed all staged, all movie, all created for some reason. I don't know that it was ever literally, when you look at it, it didn't seem like it was ever literally a thing. So it seemed to me that whatever was happening there was always in flux. They were working on a thing. It didn't fit here, that thing there. Okay. So the literalization of it seems to be what's weird. The obviousness of the differences of the people and being in flux. And so this attempt to organize a linear construct on it as a thing that then literalizes. When you have two very different people who meet only in moments, but are kind of demanding a personal freedom in the circumstance. So you see that it is in fact a creative act. And anything that is, if the feeling departs, and the feeling can depart with a look, with a this or that, when the feeling departs and you're literally in a circumstance, then you kind of have an element of security and imprisonment simultaneously. So I would say the mind starts looking for some other secret life or an underlying life or a hidden life. And how would I do that? We'll say I would probably have to get stoned a lot. Because in the stone space, it allows you some space between, away from the literal story. So I don't know if you want that foot to dominate the whole picture for you, but it's pretty big foot. So good luck. So my feeling is that you could see the political phenomena that's happening in, when there is a kind of an emergence for more perception of the female's rights not constructed to rights within a framework, but rights as a human being. So supposedly the story is released from gender ownership dictating what a person can do. And we see a world in flux. And holy shit. Where we see where identity is somehow being released from this continuum. And in some cases, it's being demanded that historically your identity is who you are. And then there is another demand, so then you see groups who then have identity organized through some past and family and structure and circumstance. And again, you find yourself walking through the street with your hands in your pocket. And you look at the Italian neighborhood, they're yelling at you. And you look at the Puerto Rican neighborhood, they're yelling at you. You look at the German neighborhood. But if you have a girlfriend or friends in any of these neighborhoods, it takes away the ownership of the neighborhood. And they're just people sharing. But you understand what would it take to get to just peoplehood? And you say, if you tried, it would take years, but it happens instantly, accidentally, in the dumbest of ways. In a kind of friendship or an intimacy that happens where the humans meet each other as human beings. then the story doesn't dominate them. The feeling does. But sometimes the story may try to terrorize them into behaving. But then you see the Mavericks that somehow were able to find a love affair that transcended the structure and the logic and the ownership of the story. And it was based on attraction. The attraction that the larger population would try to subdue and repress or organize or own, because that attraction evaded all ownership and dictates. And it crossed borders and boundaries and allowed people fantasy, what the literal world called fantasy, but in the loving world, you saw that fantasy was a real living way to be. That it wasn't captured in the literalness, that somehow, if you wished it, it was possible. So somehow you found out with a true feeling there, a Meshuggah world that would be dumbed down by a literal survival world was in fact a real dimension, where the literalness was only a part of it, not the ownership of the story. So somehow you discover that the ownerships of the story, money being the dominant factor, is the measurement in that to some degree. And not the literal money it needs to be. It could be 350 billion if you, with the smell of it. You may not even have $20 in your pocket, but you got 300 billion stashed or something. Okay. So I'll groove with that because I understand how that does work somehow, where you're strung out and wealthy at the same time. And then you understand that strung out runs through the story, whether you have to pay the rent tomorrow or whether you have to pay $1 billion bill, or that you kind of understand that somehow hidden in the story is a similar situation where somehow you're not poor, you're broke. And you understand what broke means. Broke means you don't have the rent tomorrow when it's due or something, but broke may also mean that you don't have the 130 million that you need this afternoon to. So you see broke runs through the story, but broke is not poor. Broke runs through the systemic logic where you say, I have 3 days to get the rent in this amount, and you see the brilliance of the logic inherently in the form, and you see it runs through every aspect of the story. And then if you discover if you're ever in the military or whatever, you discover how many lives to be sacrificed towards a certain experience. And you discover that you'll probably be one of those guys sacrificed. And so then you see why they need the songs and the drumming and then this and that, because it's missing an honest conversation. And they say, what is the honest conversation? Is that there is a structure telling you what is happening in life. And when you discover it deeply, you see the bullshit of the organized structure. And that everything in life is missing a heartfelt conversation, an honest conversation. Not only is it missing it, but you see how deeply it's avoided. And so you see even the challenge would be if you walked into a group of these dudes inside the owners of the world, supposedly. And you see a presence would create a concern because your presence would cause a reflection. So they would resist that. So we'll say these structures that supposedly make the decisions resist a soul-searching reflection, just as they would do in the Army or in the Marines when they say, oh, look, this. But then they say, look, if the person has a soul-searching experience and they're not allowed to soul-search as if it's a flaw, then you're going to have, what is it called? RSPCD or something like that. Okay. That the mind protects itself from the experience that it just had. So it's not a flaw, the PTSD. It is, in fact, a mechanism that allows you to function, because there are moments when you've gone beyond the human. And so you discover that in time. So PTSD, to my mind, is allowing you this juggling act of survival, but then becomes a condition itself. But the condition is that there's something that is requiring deep reflection. Not healing this and that, not to get a job, but as a matter of fact, for you to perceive what happened. You see the life that you've lived. And when you see the life that you've lived, you meet yourself for the first time from a very different place, where it's not around survival or continuity. You see that there's integrity of form somehow. And without fully grasping it, you see that somehow you've kept to some hidden integrity in your life, no matter how much they've tried to logical or literalize it. You meet conversations in your own being, and you meet processes in your own existence that were taken for granted. But when you meet them, they become almost sacred. And that means no bullshit around them. You don't need a conspiracy theory. You don't need to literalize it in any way. The energy itself is too precious to be jived. Because once you perceive it deeply, the elements of self controlling the story diminish as being too lame. When the self that tries to use its own history as a way of ownership of the story, I don't know that the body agrees with such an ownership anyway. But basically, I feel that one discovers that it is not an ownership, but it is in fact a participation and a shared experience. And when you meet yourself, it's as if you've met a lover. There's a kind of respect that happens in seeing that you've lived these years as if it was normal, when in fact the magical aspect of living is life itself. And we've normalized it. But once you perceive that the deepest dimension of life is life itself, then the attitudes it takes on afterwards, but you meet the life itself. And you see the life itself as having a conversation with a mystery. And when you enter into the story, I think then you enter into history as mystery for yourself. And that's why I say it resembles more of a movie or a novel or something like that, because then you see the norm becomes a mirror to step into a life from a different place. The difference of the dimensions of consciousness, let's say an event happens that introduces you to a dying process in you, but it introduces you to a dying process in life as being part of the living process. And then your eye sees that normally as part of your around it. What you see is living and dying simultaneously. If living means the form, but once you perceive living and dying, living is no longer limited to the body or the form. You see life around you. If you feel for something or laugh at a form or something like that, you share the space. So once it is released from the ownership of the self, you see that the shared moment, the shared experience is also your life. It's not limited to identity. Then I say, the person then who falls in love assumes the identity of the lover. So I feel why. I say, because life is then coming from a fresh place. It's no longer being historically bound. So at that point in time, you're no longer driven sexually through loneliness. You have a sensuality through aloneness. And that sensuality is what the sexuality is a space that the sexuality is trying to get to. But the literalness of the sexuality is it's related to a literalness. The sensuality is in fact a merger of an I and thou experience. So in my experience, the sensuality may express itself sexually, but it's not dominated by that form. The sexual limits one within the existence. The sensuality is not defined by that literalness of it. It comes out of it. There's a relationship to a genuine love. And so when there's a relationship to a genuine love, no historical element is imposed on it. When you meet a lover, then a new world opens up. And the expressions that you then share, you're sharing together. And I feel that that is our premise here, that there is an invitation where one assumes an identity in relationship to the experience. But the experience is in fact authentically happening. Then one has assumed the identity. The identity doesn't own the story. Johnny Depp, well, let's see where it goes. But is he happy with that? He's what stage is he? You want to? Can you ask him? What do you think? Are you happy with that verdict?
I'd say he's probably happy.
Yeah, he can. Okay. Well, it's not a literal verdict, but now it is a kind of sense that supposedly there's a response then to women's activism and Me Too and all these other things, where then these other guys say, hey, look, those were normal things and situations that were happening in those days or whatever. And they say, are you kidding? It wasn't normal. In retrospect, cop to your. So I say, okay, it's all up in the air.
I didn't see any women supporting her.
Yeah, I know.
It was pretty out there.
I would say that anyone supporting either of them would be kind of absurd anyway. I didn't see like they needed your support. And I don't think that Johnny Depp was writing me, hey, Danny, please support me. Or Amber said, please, baby, support me. So it seems to me that if I would even offer my support, they would like, would you leave us alone already? So it seems that that's the lifestyle that they're in. And the lifestyle they're in has a trip like that. But basically, it is also revealing that once the thing collapses, then the things that were normal while they were happening then become outrageously crappy. And you say, how the hell did these people hang around in this situation? Why is she going to get punched in the face, or this guy going to get kicked in the ass? Or, okay. And they say somehow they're literalized into a situation that they're essentially free from, but they have to commit enough of a violence for them to be free from the literal story. Where you would just see an experience for them, one word or some argument, and you would see it's over, but they would take 5 years to see what you see in a minute. So the literalness of the story, and it's over, you see it was over all along. While it was happening, it was over. And anyone who witnessed certain experiences and it could have told them that, look, come on, man, you guys don't need this shit. And in fact, you're trying to hold something together that doesn't literally exist. So I say, okay, is there a way of seeing what is? If that is not literally happening, what they're saying, even though all of those events may have happened, but what did it mean? And it meant that people thought of each other as pieces of shit, as creepy pieces of shit, that they can do that to them. And yet everyone had to go along with it and make believe it didn't happen, or it does happen, it does happen. And I say, how could it not be that you have a relationship with your free human beings where it's an elective, you're into it because it's a true thing, it's genuine for you and whatever, but the literalness of the story is not the ownership of the experience. So they say, why would they hang towards something that you know that there's going to be a profound hurt in it? And not only the profound hurt, but in order to save your ass, you're going to have to destroy the other's ass. In order to save your sense of who you want to be in this climate, then you're going to have to send the others to hell. And they're going to be sent to hell for being drunk or being jerks or being this, like almost, and look at the entire population. Okay. So should one have an opinion? I would say once they were in it, they must have been trying to get out of it any way they could without being able to get out of it. But they were, so none of us would have stood for any of those descriptions, supposedly, for being treated like a piece of shit or left alone to die or punched in the head or whatever the story that they're saying. There would have to be a hey baby moment and say, hey baby, you still into this? So it did seem to be missing a hey baby moment. I don't know. Well, Krishnamurti said at one point, if people cannot come to their space, then the law comes in and defines it for them. So it seems that people who knew both of them knew all this shit that came out in trial. And somehow they went through the experience. And if you tried to deny them, if you said, hey, bro, why don't you snap out of it? They would have fought you to have this experience, to have this hurt. They would have fought for it. They would have claimed it. They would have somehow, and they would have had then to demonize the other person into pieces of crap that they were once attracted to. So let me enter into the story and see it to be anything more than a movie that you're in. And it's a movie that if you watched, it would kind of break your heart. Because somehow a person you once felt for, now your mission is to kill them. Or to stamp out the feeling that you had. So it's a mystery, at the same time it's our history. And we think we know what's happening because of social events around it. But then you see again and again and again, whatever level it is on, the broken heart exists. And it seems that the literal way of avoiding the broken heart is to send your partner to it, to have the broken heart. You want the job, Spiro. Doesn't pay well, but you get a chance to have experience. Johnny Depp.
Well, I'm not in Johnny Depp's situation. That sounds like fear and loathing. But no, they can slide away.
No. If in fact you read the story, or we're reading the story now, in Revelation, it can be just common crap that they're going through, where people cheat on each other and do these numbers, hide this and do that. That's normal. They each have their normal way of doing that trap. When the feeling has fallen away and the form continues, then it becomes increasingly violent. Where before was an agreement that happened naturally. And what was the agreement? That somehow a person entered into your life and you entered into their life, where you would share the life experience with them, however it went down. And somehow there was something sacred in that perception without it having to be a costume drama or a trip, but somehow a look, a wink, a walk became a big deal. It didn't have to be this or that, but once there was a true feeling shared, it illuminated the proceedings. In the absence of that, and then the job became a job, literalized around survival. In the presence of that feeling, the job was a mutual creation between people shared. It wasn't dominated by survival as much as it was by friendship, where survival was an aspect of it, but not the ownership of the story. It was more of a shared experience. When the experience is no longer shared, it goes into personal secrecy. So then there's usually, from my perspective, an event waiting. I don't think that the event is causal, I think that the event is a reflection of what is happening. But the event is usually blamed. But to me, the event is more a reflection of something that has been happening in time anyway. That it's been in flux or up in the air or shifting. And so it meets an event that reveals. And in the revelation, the thread is interrupted. I feel that once the thread is interrupted, then time and space happen. But the literalness of the interruption is what's actually taking place. Then I feel that the elements of it, the continuity of it is lag time. Because one has to talk to the landlord and one has to talk to the lawyer. So there's still the event is still carrying on even though it's dissolved. Because it has other dimensions that it has to deal with legally and structurally and socially. But I would feel that to be lag time, that something shifts and the form shifts. Where then it becomes naive. The literalness of the world then becomes the reality. And that means the personal survival is the dominant force. So then I enter into the story that we see in front of us around personal survival. And I would say, if I was her, I would say, he did this to me, that creepy. And if I was him, I would say, boy, she was a real hustling mother jumper. Let me tell you, she hung. And I say, okay, let me do her. And they say, you never understood any damn thing. This guy used to fart in bed. Do you believe that? And I said, holy shit. And then you hear him, he says, you couldn't believe it. So then I say, okay, the literalization of the story. Okay, Kai, you feel that she was hustling, right?
I feel that she has serious psychological problems.
If you were in her lifestyle situation, you would probably have serious psychological. Do you remember when
I
you
was
I
in her
understand.
situation.
I know. So you understand, that's what I'm saying that. If you were in that situation, holy shit, the only way I could defend myself is by having serious psychological problems.
But I walked away. I never did one public announcement of it.
Yeah. Well, you had your way as you've, let's say, okay, thank God, no?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say that they would have put you on the TV like that. And you would have had to say, well, okay. And they said, no, she's a little wreck. So it's a life story. When the feeling falls away, sometimes there's a deep hurt. And the hurt is not so logical. So then I don't think you can, so then I say, okay, do I see a hurt in the story? And I say, yeah, I do see a hurt that runs through the depth story and her story. Then you have the story. But I do feel that there was a time that they did feel for each other. So I do feel that, so my eye is looking at the genuineness of the story and then the story, where they then protect the show business story and how it looks or whatever. But there is a crying over the loss of the feeling. Just the simpleness of that, because then you see that you enter into the literalness of the world, but that somehow when the feeling exists in you intelligently, you are immune from this mother jumper place. They can talk the shit they want, but you don't come from anywhere. You're free. And free men, you enter into the story because there's a creative expression. So I feel that when an experience happens to you, you enter into your body from a different place. It's no longer around the history. It is more, you discover the art of the life. And the art of the life has its own time. It's not only measured in literal time, but it's measured more in evocative time. So when the world is coming to you from a different place, then you see it from a different place also. and you see the literalness of it, and you see that the avoidance, that there's an experience inherently in that story, no matter what, that one is going to be ashamed of themselves for having, and even if they were right or wrong, because you did love that person for a moment. You understand? And then you sent that, to save your culo, you sent them into a shit world. So then you kind of understand there's a missing conversation in your life, where in order to save my career, baby, I had to send you into the shittiest fucking place where they'll ridicule you everywhere you go. And I know how to play that, I say. And because why? Because I'm a Johnny Depp, mother jumper. Okay. You ain't gonna screw with me, mother. You missed my sword fighting career. So I say the literalness of the story, I say no, it couldn't have been that organized unless there must have been a genuine feeling at a certain point. And when you've had that experience as yourself, Kai, do you remember that there was a moment where it was genuine?
Yes.
Then you see, as it became a thing, then the history of each of the people started to take over. So then you see it becomes a show business marriage. And then the rules of show business start to take over. And that's to keep your persona going, how to make a buck. So basically, once you do that, once you're in that mode, then you see a person you may have once liked, then you have to kill them. Nothing so pleasant in it. And I say, why? I think it still would, I think that's why you say, Kai, it would be challenging for you to send the other person to hell.
I didn't do it. Even though he attempted with me, I refused to do it.
Thank God.
Thank God, exactly. Because I could have.
Huh?
I could have.
No, he would have killed you. Except a different climate. If you came back 30 years, like now, 30 years later, and what do you think? But my feeling is that it's you just watch a broken heart in front of you. So you kind of understood that if you literally re-enter the story like that, what the challenge would have been at that time. But still, whatever it is, it's still up in the air. Not the literal event, but the somehow the memory of things. What do you think? I mean, for most of these stories, they're coming up 30 years ago and 20 years ago and things like that also, not only last week or last month, but
Yeah,
now,
well, we just resolved ours. That was the person I resolved everything with. So 30 years later. So that's nice.
yeah, that's what I mean. That was, so from the sadhana, in other words, the life from the journey is different from the life of the literal existence.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, you understand that you shared something and you released the story. That's your call. I mean, you're also free to re-enter the story from a different standard, but basically you wake up one day and you understand that something is shared from years ago that has entrapped the people to some degree. And there's a moment, a hey baby moment, that releases the person from the story also. So then you discover it was there, and it's not the past. It's some elements of our life are carried on, even if an incident happened in the past. It's called the past, but it's carrying on into the present. And it's waiting for a moment. Whether it's an accident, it looks like an accidental moment. It usually looks like an accidental moment because it's not organized by the ego. So it's not an ego experience. It's shame not being shamed.
Mm.
It's shame seeing from another. It's forgetting not as a way of survival, but forgetting where you forget the hurt and releases the story. But you can't forget the hurt until you forget the hurt. So unfortunately or fortunately, we have come into a point of our life where genuineness is one of the strong features of it, not survival. So I feel that you come into your story from a genuineness that somehow relationships happen with you very deeply and they happen and they were lost and create and was like almost all of it a creative experience in it all. But then you also understand that once it literalized, it starts to become violent. And people are trapped in a circumstance where they have to be sneaks and hide themselves. You understand? And so when it may be natural, when the feeling is lost, it may be natural. So you see, everything is not only missing a heartfelt conversation, it's avoiding it deeply. And so one, I feel in my experience, something happens years, time is only a factor of grace, not so much a literalness, where you say, holy shit, you see it from a different place. And you can enter into the story and it releases it, but it doesn't come from the ego. It's not the ego ownership of the story. You understand that the hurt will exist for centuries, but there's a hey baby moment, it can be released. But not therapeutically or psychologically or through any trip, but around a deep truth. That something is deeply seen where the story is released from its ownership. And you see that somehow the hurt was written into the story. It was a divide that somehow the hurt allowed it to disintegrate or shift just by naturalness. That somehow the person's quest for a deep love would not allow itself, even for safety or whatever, that somehow it will transfer the love to the children or to the circumstance, but that somehow that feeling has to be there for it to be in a circumstance. You want the job, Kai?
Never know how to answer that question.
Well, Spiro would say you have the job. Okay, you say something wise, Spiro. Go ahead, tell us something wise.
No, it's what job do we really want?
Well, let's say it's not only the job you have, you perceive then your life as the job you have, but in the perception, I'm saying that somehow when a perception comes, an aha moment comes in there, that enters into the picture with you.
Yeah, sometimes with a big pie in the face.
Well, it can be a pie in the face because you see how long you've avoided the very simple thing.
So we're here on a journey, and
So when
there's
you come in
some
the house
heartfelt
today,
moments, and then there's a lot of other stuff in between those.
they were saying that they're going to hose you down tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
That
Could
you
use
need
a
to be
wash.
hosed. You and Segway need to be really hosed.
To be boys with hoses.
Well, with all the
Splashing.
smoke around you, with all the smoke around us, you may need to be hosed down. So let's say, how are you? Where are you in the life now? Since your perspective, you don't have a literal life, do you?
No, I really don't.
No. So it's it would be called
Sure.
flux, but no. Let's say that you've always played it that you didn't have a literal life.
Yeah.
Where it didn't literalize, except when you had relationship, and then it took on a shape or a form in an apartment. But when there was no such relationship like that, then your relationship was in flux that you had. But flux was your style of life. So even when you had relationship, you took them on flux with you. Mhm. Okay. Looking back at it, what seemed logical is to be discovered what happened. So let's see how it naturalized. That relationship naturalized into a thing that it was normal, even though one's life that didn't have that such a thing. And so, but then it became normal, and the plans around it become normal. And then you see something that was completely a creative experience normalizes into a literal one. And the purpose of it is the continuity. But if the feeling is lost, the continuity becomes a prison. That is normal. So then you see much of the population imprisoned in circumstance that is normal, in jobs that are not fulfilling, in relationships that they have to hide themselves, or so you see a world in flux. You don't see a normal literalized world that everything is going okay. You see an incident happens in the world, and all of a sudden there's war, and it's out of nothing. But it's not out of nothing. You see a world in flux. And in flux, you see a kind of inhumanity. If you were in it, if you were literally in any of those enterprises, you would then see the inhumanity of the very circumstance you're in by being in it. And that it's normal. But it wouldn't be normal for us. So I say, well, what is it? It's the exploration of the experience when it's literally happening, and then when it leaves. And the absence of it is as much a part of the experience as the presence of it. Those are only elements of the experience. The absence of it creates a more genuine presence. The deeper its experience, not as a flaw, but as a genuine aspect of the experience that you're in, when the feeling shifts and the structure then shifts. Where there's some continuity in it, but at the same time, the feeling that gave it a life shifts to another play. So I say the normalcy of that allows the possibility, the small possibility of a friendship, of a hey baby friendship coming from a different place. That man, we shared this experience together. And we did this together. And it's not by rules that we're hanging. The rules will come, but basically we're kind of agreeing that it be human. And as long as it is human, and that's not spelled out, but it is spelled out when it ain't human. And when it ain't human, you start to see all these other dimensions that come when you lock someone up in a jail, the fear, you start to see when a person is locked in their own life, it's like being locked in a jail cell. It literalizes. So somehow there is a body of experience that one has in this life. And that means that you experience the creative expression when the feeling is there and shared. And when the feeling is not shared in the same way, you experience the dissolution of the form. If it's perceptive, the dissolution of the form, it's another dimension of the experience where the friendship is a deeper aspect of the love affair that releases the story. Because then you see friend, that means freedom. That is another dimension of the story when the literalness of the story dissolves. That usually you can't force that to happen, but there is a moment possibly of, hey baby, you've had this shared experience. And there's something that comes into your life where you remember it or you see it, and it releases a story from your control. You see a shared experience just as if you were in a movie together with the person. But again, the genuineness of life is not coming from a neediness, but there's an agreement. Somehow, what's the agreement? The agreement when you affectionately kiss someone, there's an agreement that happened in the bodies of the being and the brain. If that agreement isn't there, then it becomes a violation. It's an intimate act. So I say, how to measure that? I don't know fully how to measure that in the Me Too world and the not Me Too world, and I don't know and who's hurt and who's not hurt. You see a world in flux, and you see bullshit and you see a truth running through it simultaneously. Would I have to go into the story as a literal identity when I see deeper dimensions of what was happening? For me, the story, okay, it's still in flux. What do you say, Kai? Still unfolding. But has it come your way, that feeling? Of going back into the story? Literally? No.
No.
But I mean, when I say it's parallel at the same time. So you may hear someone's in town, or this is flying overhead, or you got a call or something like that from years ago, as you just did. And you see all of a sudden, it's a kind of being there for the experience, where you're kind of not, because it's in its history, yet at the same time, it's in the moment. So
Absolutely.
I feel that the more that you see the life as coming from the energy or the experience, then it's not as literalized. And so there's a moment of recognition still waiting in the story, where you once loved this person. And somehow that still exists, even though the history may have taken it away and the whole story may have. There's a moment when that initial feeling was there.
That's much easier for me when I'm not in a day-to-day reality with the person.
I understand what you mean when you're.
I mean, Danny, there's a lot of in-between time between those fleeting moments.
For you to have the experience.
Whatever yeah.
No, let's say you are having the experience that everyone told you were going to have. And you did it anyway. Because you were a cool dude. So you say, are you kidding me?
Because what else? What else?
No, right? Am I going to say? And they say, look, people from such a background and this and that, if you take your DNA test and this and that, you won't make it, man. And then you say, come on, are you kidding? We met in India and we're going to do this shit and we're going to try that. And hey, baby, and give it a shot. And I say, I understand that experience. I think I flew back from India with someone from New Zealand, from India. We were broke. Someone gave us a car. We drove cross country, so this is our story, but it was normal. But then if you look at it, excuse me, what's going on?
It's interesting.
It's interesting.
You take a photo of it.
Taking a photo of his beard. But then
No, but the whole,
let's get Jai to see if she likes the beard.
Oh, it's pretty well trimmed.
Oh, what happened? Oh, that's Mary. That must be her place. So what do you think of this kind of conversation, Kai? Is it too dumb, or is it goofily have meaning to it? That we see that somehow our life is a creative act also.
Seems to be the only meaning these days, really.
Well, let's say, but you can still have a meeting with friends who are in a different space where you're discussing creatively what your relationship to the story is. And you see that at the same time that it's literal story that you're in, it's also, it's not to be taken for granted. Somehow all these events created this form for you. And somehow if you're there, it's because you're true to something in yourself. Even if there may be moments where it conflicts or whatever, you still somehow, you're not there because there's a gun to your head or you're forced into this or that. It's only a mommy away. It's only a feeling away. But it is not, from my perspective, like you're serving in the Marines or something like that, or you're in prison or something like that. So for me, you have friendship, you have dialogue. That shows you you're not a real prisoner of the story. If it became really cheesy or shitty or dangerous or violent, it's out of there in a minute. So it does give you an insight, even though our main man may bring out that looking glass, it does give you a sense, and I'm going to have to whip out the looking glass at him later and look at this beard question again. But the question that's raised, there we are, okay, is that you're free. You know that. You know that you're there because it speaks to you in the right thing, even if it's a challenge. And that has been. And that has been when you share the feeling with friends. You share a world that's kind of hidden from the literal world. And that is that with the friendship, there's a conversation around the journey, around the sadhana being the reality. And being in love being the reality, not having to do this or having to do that because you have to do that, but somehow in the friendship, the conversation is around the real feeling being the underlying connection. So
Seems to be the quest for this lifetime.
I think that take a look at the cast of characters below you there, and you see different aspects of the same experience. But I also do not feel that any of us could that would stay in a situation that has an underlying violence to it. That would break it immediately. So you see that you have creatively a space around you. As long as you can be with it, it exists. Okay? We may see you in the summertime. We're coming close to the summertime.
Yeah, we'll see if the money starts to flow in. You will see me.
Well, Spiro can take care of that. I think that he can put down the glass there, and he could open up his wallet. We heard
anti-palm theory.
No, Derek has told us about what's going on there. Okay, it's been a goofy conversation. I hope it had some relevance to our lives, and Michael, bravo, and that's an interesting conversation. You are seeing the forces at play politically out there, and then you're seeing a response where they say, hold it, should we be afraid of being able to be ourselves and come from a certain place? And yet at the same time, you see the language is changing, the structure is changing. But then you also see in a circumstance, reaction, fear, all these other elements happening that one doesn't have when the association of history is not the dominant force in their life anymore, but mystery is. And you see that most of the love affairs have come out of mystery, not history. They've come out of accident or situations or whatever to have the experience. It seemed that their only reason to be, in retrospect, was to have the experience. and that there was a beauty in the experience. When it was attempt to own the experience literally, then the beauty of it left. When the survival instinct took over, then the beauty, the creative aspect of it started to diminish as being illogical. Logic starts to be the dominant force. When in the creative act, logic is only one aspect of the creative force. And that means that you know that you have to sell the story literally, creatively, or whatever. So money is an aspect of it, but you also know not to sell out the heart of the story. So I feel life that's pretty much a reflection of what is happening in one's life when it is no longer dominated by karma or history. Then it's you. You re-enter the world from you. Not you as an ego, but you no longer driven by history. What you do, you do. Not your mother, not your uncle, not this happened to you, or that had happened to you. The psyche no longer rules the day. So I think that when there is enough of an experience, one re-enters the place, just as if you assume the character in the play. It's you doing it. You're bringing your energy to it. You may call upon your history creatively. You may refer to this or that, but it's not dominated by the historical fact. It's the life force becomes the energizing thing.
Mm.
There is a quest or a journey that is happening that the life force somehow is always recognized. The person has always had logic to try to figure out what was happening or whatever. But once you become aware of a certain energy or life force that's there, you see there's you and you. You meet you from a deeper level. It doesn't own the story, but it influences it deeply. Okay, I'll see you tomorrow night then, Derek, hopefully. And thanks again.
Thank you,
Connie.
Danny.
Thanks,
Thank
Danny.
Thank you,
Bye,
Danny.
everybody.
See you guys.
Namaste.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you,
Bye.
Kyle.